Rob, thank you very much for coming on to the Scooter Based podcast.
No worries.
Today, what we will be discussing is very much your background more than anything, and it is obviously when you tell people a little bit of an introduction to yourself, it'll become clearer. But it's all about a cop's transition into instant response. So, Rob, could you please give the audience just a bit of a background to yourself, please, mate?
Yeah, my name's Rob Anderson. I'm a senior incident consultant and I work at WithSecure. WithSecure is a consultancy that spans a number of countries across Europe, and we are a cybersecurity company that's dedicated to small and medium enterprises, but we do have some big clients as well. My background, I started off, if we take it all the way back, I've always been interested in IT and computers. Ever since I was 15, I built my own PCs. I got onto the internet via the free CDs that you get on front magazines, AOL and CompuServe back then. And I carried on with my interest in the internet and everything cyber from there. I went to work for a software company. Initially, I was doing customer service and support. And then when I noticed on the shelf, they had a self-paced training kit from Microsoft, which was Windows 95 and everything to do with Windows 95. And that's when I sort of professionally started getting into IT and the internet. After that, I took my Network Essentials exam, which then gave me my Microsoft Certified Professional qualification when I was 18. Went to work for an exhibition company, ran a couple of servers, 200 endpoints there, doing their infrastructure. And then moved on to Carphone Warehouse, which at the time was only 200 branches when I joined, and then they went up to 2,000 in the space of about 2 years. So I was running around Europe doing servers and infrastructure and getting that together. So mainly Windows NT4, but then we were making the transition to Active Directory, Windows 2000, did a bit of work with Cisco networking as well. Then went to a bank called JP Morgan Chase, as they were, and that was really good. I did application integration and packaging, so really got to know the nuts and bolts of applications, how they fit together, application, the operating system, and how the applications interact with each other, because we didn't have things like DLL shimming and things like that. So you had to deconflict a lot of things. I then went to work for the Barclays Capital doing trade floor support, did that for a while, and then moved on to a wealth management company called Chiltern, and they got merged into BDO later, and I did their networking and server infrastructure across six countries. During that time, I decided that I was getting off easy working IT, and I decided to do some volunteering. I had a look around and decided what would suit me best, and I joined the Metropolitan Special Constabulary, so the Metropolitan Police Service, as a volunteer police officer. I did that for 4 years, really loved it, really got a kick out of it, got myself all sorts of trouble patrolling the streets of Paddington Green and Westminster, and decided I wanted to join full time. So Metropolitan Police at the time weren't recruiting. So in 2005, I joined City of London Police, which are quite a specialist police force. Not a lot of people know that those there's technically 3 police forces, but right in the centre of London, near Liverpool Street, where Bank of England, there's its own police force called the City of London Police, and it's been there for hundreds of years. They specialise in counter-terrorism, just due to the nature of the area. Fraud, they've got an enormous fraud and cybersecurity department, but also public order and things like that. So I was there, and I did that for I was there for 4 years, and I got promoted to sergeant there. I didn't do anything cyber or anything IT related. I decided, you know what, clean break, we'll move on. But I did get training in firearms, public order. I used to be custody trained, fraud, all those specialist skills that the force were quite quite into it, and intelligence as well, intelligence handling. Decided that I didn't want to get up at 4:20 in the morning to get into work for 7 o'clock start, so I moved on to a county police force, and there I was again frontline. I was doing pretty much a lot of the frontline stuff, missing persons, crime in action, normal day-to-day policing as a sergeant. I then went up to the control room, and then I did a lot of command and control stuff up there. So I would operationally run the room. So, radio operators who are talking to the police officers on the streets, I would manage them, and then the call takers, the people who were taking 999 calls from the public, and I'd be coordinating the sort of logistics of the room, and I would be deputising for the inspector that ran the room as well. So that was really good, got really good insight into critical incidents, command and controls, reaching out to outside agencies, coordinating things and taking a bigger picture view of things as they happen, rather than being on the ground and getting sucked into what's happening in front of you. It's taking a step back and seeing what the wider picture is. I then got promoted to inspector, so I went back to the front lines, and did pretty much what I did as a sergeant, but I was looking after 3 sergeants rather than the PCs on the front line. Still kept up my public order stuff, so I did NATO visits, and when President Trump came, and the Olympics, and protests and things like that. So still carried on doing that. I then went back into the control room because I had a unique skill set. I became a firearms commander. So essentially, when a firearms incident happens, a firearms commander declares that it's a firearms incident, and police officers with firearms need to be deployed. And what I did during that is I would do a risk assessment, give them a briefing about the intel and intelligence that I've got, make an assessment of what powers and policies and laws that we get to use, and then give them their tactics. So is it going to be, right, okay, we're going to do something quite low level, or is the danger as such that we're going to do something quite interventionist and quite high level? And then I'd brief that out, and I'd be briefing those firearms officers, and then I would be briefing the unarmed officers, and then hopefully if I got time, and a lot of the time I didn't, I'd be ringing up a senior officer and saying, sir, ma'am, we've got this issue. I've deployed these tactics. Do you agree? So there's structured briefing. So that I dealt with that. Part of that role as an inspector up there, I also dealt with major crime. So if there was a crime in action, such as a kidnapping, a murder, or something very high risk, a high risk missing person, I would be taking the sort of strategic control of that in the initial stages. And then once there was a bit of a time to hand it over to somebody else, then it would get handed over to somebody else. So basically I would speak with the chief constable's voice. So after 16 years of that, I was looking at another 19 years if I wanted to stay to the end of my career. I decided that 16 years of earlys, lates and nights was enough for me and my family, so I decided to come out. And it wasn't me left and then sort of jumped straight in. I sort of had to think about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. Natural feel for me, because during all that time, although I did nothing to do with cyber or anything technical, I still at home, I had my own little projects that I had. So I had my Raspberry Pi with the antenna poking out the window, tracking the planes. I wrote my own code to do various bits and pieces. So I kept my technical skills up, and I still built my own computers and did all the technical things around the house and things like that. So I wanted to go back into that field. I was really lucky. One of the guys that I used to work with at Carphone Warehouse, he's a CTO for quite a major company. I went and spoke to him and said, look, you know, this is my skill set now. And he knew my skill set of old, because I was in the team that he fed a lot of work into my team. So he knew quite a lot about me and my technical skills. And he's pointed me in the way of cybersecurity. All right, okay. And I said, right, okay, can you just give me an idea what's changed in the industry between 2005 up until 2000 and 21. That's when I left, 21. And he went through some various things, and I was really, I sort of, when I was having the conversation, I kind of said, oh, you know, I had a bit of a heavy heart, because you know, I expected him to turn around and say, right, you know, all this has changed, and you know, we were on these protocols, and IP4's dead, and you know, this is happening over here, and you know, everything's been pushed into the cloud, and all the clouds different. And actually, he just explained to me, yes, there are things that are different, that absolutely are, but they've evolved over time. But a lot of the fundamentals had stayed the same. So all my knowledge about TCP/IP and the internet and how it works, and that was still valid. The way that operating systems were valid, you know, that information was still valid. Active Directories obviously makes up a big part of a lot of infrastructure at companies. You know, essentially, yes, there are changes to that, but it still works in the same ways, and a lot of the fundamental rules are the same. The big gap I had was cloud. I hadn't touched cloud. I was one of these guys who was in a data center shivering and putting stuff in racks. So I knew that was a big thing that I needed to sort of get a hold of. So what I did is I did a skills gap analysis, and I started off with cloud qualifications to start off with. So I did my AWS foundation, and I did my Azure foundation. I did self-paced training kits, and the exams were relatively cheap. They're like 100 quid a pop. I then started to look into cybersecurity specifically. So I went with the CompTIA track. The reason why is because there seemed to be a lot of content in there. There was a lot of people, there were a lot of companies, it was American companies a lot of the time, but they were mentioning those specific qualifications. The resources were quite low cost, so you could go on a platform like Udemy and buy a lecture series for £25, and buy the book and do it that way. And the exams were relatively low cost as well. So I started at Security Plus. I then did my Pen Test Plus. Pen Test Plus was good fun. Nowhere the depth of other qualifications, but it gave you an idea of what people were doing.
Just to come in on that one, Rob, did you have a plan of what role you were going for, or were you just doing the qualifications at this point? Because sometimes the certifications can be a little bit like chicken and egg when finding a role in school.
So I wanted to get myself onto a baseline where I could talk about cybersecurity. So I wanted to demonstrate that I had skills in terms of managing incidents and dealing with crisis, but I wanted to have a baseline knowledge so I could go for a wide variety of roles, because you know, you can evolve. I didn't have incident response in mind, if I'm honest with you, when I went on that journey. So I was prepared to look at SOC roles. I was even prepared to look at GRC roles and things like that. So it was just getting that baseline, because if I can talk about that baseline knowledge, I can demonstrate, right, okay, I can evolve into the role that you want, that I'm going for, and talk about that. So did my CISA Plus, which is more about analytics. I then decided, right, okay, we're going to go a bit bigger now. So I went and did my CISP and passed that, which was quite good. And then I started applying for roles. Got to be honest with you, that was really tough. It was probably, I started probably in the March, and I didn't really get an interview till June. And I just couldn't understand it. I was really lucky though. So I spoke to people on LinkedIn, and there were a couple of people who were former cops themselves, and they tweaked my CV, and they gave me some mentoring, had conversations that weren't quite job interviews, but it was more of a sort of professional discussion about, right, okay, these are the things that you want to be talking about. Tell me what you know, what's your impression, things like that. So I was really lucky. Once I got that my CISP, then people kind of sat up and started to take more note of me. I got a lot more interviews, and I was lucky at one point where I was sitting on, you know, 5 offers at the same time, which, to be honest, was my mind was blown.
Like London buses.
Well, exactly. I mean, and then when WithSecure, when I saw the incident response role at WithSecure, I was just like, I could do that. I could really do that. Even though I hadn't done any digital forensics whatsoever, And but I have done incident response, so it was kind of, I can talk about the fundamentals of the operating system. I can talk about evidence preservation and security. I can talk about the principles of ACPO, principles of digital evidence and things like that. But they're going to have to invest in me a little bit. But what I could do is bring them the incident response side of things. Are you there, Nick? You've frozen up.
Still here. I know that the video's frozen now, isn't it? But I'm still here.
Yeah, okay, no worries. So I could bring them the instant response. 3 interviews later, I got invited onto the incident response team in London at WithSecure. And they hit me quite hard, actually. There was no grace period. It was kind of, they sat me down. They showed me like a playground of an incident. I then had to go away and explain what had gone on and write a report on that. And then it kind of went from there. And then they said, right, okay, we're going to start bringing you into projects. So I was plugging into projects where there would be another consultant that would be a lead, and I would plug into the side, and I would take task specific work from them, and then I would do analysis on it and then feed those results back into the project. And then eventually my digital forensic skills were such where I could start looking at, rather than looking at specific artifacts, I could look at hosts on their own and look for things that are of interest there.
Perfect. So a very, very varied background, but like a very interesting one as well. And they're all, whilst they sound quite like jumpy IT to police, back to IT, and then into security, it's not actually as far-fetched as what people might think. So what skills do you think cross over well between your former life in the police incident response to now your current life in the digital world doing incident response? What skills have you brought over?
So I think the decision making skills is kind of the big one. So if I look at it rather than from a digital side of things and a sort of cyber incident management, if I take it from a policing incident, if somebody rings up the police and says, right, there's a guy running around in the high street with a gun, okay, you've got to evaluate the information and intelligence. So there's a thing called the national decision making model that hopefully all police officers should be aware of, and anybody in law enforcement should be aware of. It's really valuable way of explaining the way you are thinking and how you've arrived at your decisions and how to brief it to others. So we give the example, there's somebody running around the high street with a gun. Okay, you've only got one report at the moment. So right, okay, what can I do to find out more about this incident? The high street's got CCTV, right? You tell somebody, right, go away and develop that information intelligence. Right, okay, you can see somebody walk in the street with a gun pointing at a solicitor's office. Okay, right, so we've confirmed the intelligence. We know it's directed towards the solicitor's office. Right, what details have we got towards that solicitor, about that solicitor? So that information intelligence, that's always being developed. You're getting all that information, and hopefully in the police I had an intelligence desk that I would say go away and find out as much as you can. You then go round to what's known as a working strategy and a risk assessment. Right, what do I want to achieve here? So obviously I want to protect the public. I don't want anybody to get hurt. I want to protect the people in that solicitor's office because it's directed at that solicitor's office. I want to protect unarmed officers that may be in the area. I want to protect the armed officers. I want to make sure that we do things proportionately, things like that. So you develop that, and you develop a tier of, right, what's the highest risk? So the highest risk in that instance is if he's directing his anger at the solicitor's office, that's who I should be thinking about first. Then the public, then unarmed officers, then armed officers. And then you've got that tiered response. So we want to manage. There's a specific minimise risk to the people in the solicitors, minimise risk to the public, maximise safety of unarmed officers, maximise safety of armed officers, and also ensure that the reputation of the police. So we're doing something positive. We're dealing with that. We then go on to powers and policy, right? What powers and policies can I use in order to resolve this incident? So there's things like power of search, use of force, powers of arrest, you know, codes of practice to do with the use of firearms, codes of practice in relation to things like mental health and things like that. So these are all the policies and procedures that I'm thinking about and referring to, not necessarily getting the books out, but in my mind, I'm writing down, right, this is what I'm thinking about at the time. And then out of that, I develop tactics. So and I'll develop tactics for various contingencies. So at the moment, the guy's out on foot, so it will be an approach and officers will challenge from cover. But if he then gets into a car, right, how are we going to stop that car? And there's various tactics to deal with that. If he goes into a building, what do we do then? You know, do we contain it? Do we enter it? And then if he goes into an open area, what do we do from then? So he or she go from then. Then you think about bringing other pieces of other players into it. So you're not just talking to the firearms officers, and you're then saying, right, I want the unarmed officers to get the public away and create a sterile area. And then, you know what, I'm going to get a helicopter to give me a view on the top, and then I'm going to get a dog unit along just to support the firearms officer. So you've got all that. You've got your tactics. And then you need to come up with a plan of action. So in that instance, and this comes from a real life incident I dealt with, it was firearms officers straight to the scene. Unarmed officers are going to get a cordon and move the public away. Dog unit's going to go there and support the armed officers. Helicopters hopefully going to come on top, and we're going to contain and negotiate. Meanwhile, we're going to ring up the solicitors and say, look, is there a back door? Can you guys get out the back door? And then hopefully get that line of communication. I brief that out to everybody. Everybody knows what they're doing. Everybody's got the knowledge. Meanwhile, that intel and information intelligence that you're developing in the background, that's that continuing cycle. We put in the phone call to the solicitors. Yes, they know the guy. He's been recently through a divorce. He blames the solicitors for not. So we know who he is now, so we can go away and do that. We can give instructions to the solicitors, so they're all locked themselves in a back room now. So we've mitigated that risk. That changes my tactics in terms of, right, okay, this is a specific threat against the solicitors. So maybe we can, you know, maybe we don't have to push the cordon out as far as we did because we were interrupting a lot of business or whatever. There's too much impact to the business. Maybe we can bring the cordon in a little bit and we start calling out negotiators to talk to the person and things like that. So that essentially it's that iterative cycle. And so if we sort of pick that up and move it to cyber and incident response, you know, usually an incident response starts when we see something's out of normal, a file's appeared, we're getting unusual network traffic, we're getting alerts. Okay, you know, that's your information and intelligence, right, starting there. Then you start your cycle of, right, how can we develop that? And then you start looking at, right, what's at immediate risk? You know, if it's on the periphery of a network that you don't care about, okay, the risk is quite low, and the number of hoops that an attacker might have to jump through to get to what is critical is different. You know, whereas if you've got something that's happening on what a domain controller, something that's got visibility on, you know, that's big risk, and you're going to have to take big decisions in order to contain that. So that, again, that's that sort of risk assessment. What are you trying to protect? What are you trying to achieve? You know, is the risk so bad that you're going to have to take down the whole network, which I've had to do last weekend, unfortunately, for a customer. And then you're looking at your policies and procedures. Hopefully, you know, your clients have got your playbooks, your incident response plans. You know, you're looking at securing and preserving evidence, you know, and then you're on your plans, what you're going to do. And a lot of my role is, right, okay, what's the proximity of our threat actors to causing real harm? The closer they are, the shorter the time I've got to stop it, and therefore the more drastic action I need to take. So that's where you think about your tactics, you know, turning on more logging, severing, you know, like Die Hard, running into the comms room with a chainsaw and cutting the phone line. You know, I've never done that. But you know, you're thinking about your tactics in advance, and then, right, agreeing a plan. You know, in my old role, the plan, you know, I was responsible for formulating the plan and getting it done. Obviously, in the new role, you're going to have to be more appreciative of the business and what the impact of your actions are. So it's more of a sort of a collaborative decision making of, you present these tactics and what you think the risk is and the proximity of the, you know, the threat to the risk, and then you let the business come back and say, right, this is acceptable or this isn't acceptable. But you're
Mm.
obviously responsible for that risk assessment and saying, right, okay, I really think this is bad, you need to do something, or we can hold off on this for a couple of days, let's park this and let's deal with it after the weekend or whatever, just because of you might need support for the extra stuff that you won't be available to you over the weekend.
Mm. And it's really interesting because, like, given your background, that it just seems like it's a no-brainer for anybody coming from the police to move into instant response. What do you think that that's the only way, or what advantage would you say? Um, Someone coming from, maybe they've just come in, they're a graduate, they've gone into a SOC, and then they want to move into an instant response that way. Um, what advantages do you think that they can bring to the role that maybe, it's different to what you can bring to the role?
So I think, if you're very good at writing up your tickets, so obviously SOCs get tickets on alerts and things like that. What I would say is, what's your decision with the ticket? Is it an incident or isn't it? Right. Okay. Why do you structure it really well? Why do you think it's an incident? If you do think an incident, what is the risk? Okay. And what are you referring to whilst you're doing it? And then suggest some actions. So that's kind of, if you can write in a structured way that gives a good situation report, that's the first good thing. The other good thing is, knowing tactics for containment. That's a really big thing. A lot of the time, SOC analysts don't recognise what options are available, not just in terms of security controls, but things like turning on certain logging. So DNS logs, firewall logs, make recommendations in order to, you're not just wanting to find out what the alert is, you want to find
Mhm.
out where it's come from. Uh, Time and again, I've seen with SOCs is they've seen on a domain controller something drop on there like Cobalt Strike, and they say, right, well, Defender has picked it up or whatever product's picked it up, therefore there's nothing left to do. Well, how did it get on there? Be more
Mhm.
curious about what where it's, and I get it's hard, especially tier one SOC analysts, that they might be measured on how many tickets they get through. But if they can go through that extra step so that they show the tier two SOC analysts that that the next level above them, that they've done a bit of investigating into the lateral movement and the accounts that have been used, and a little bit of investigation on where that account's being used as well. I think that really goes to that's really helpful. I
Mhm.
think um, a lot of organisations, the SOC and the incident response teams are integrated. It may be worth going towards that, heading towards those types of organisations, because then if there is an incident response, a major incident, as a SOC analyst, you can take some of the work away from the incident responders that are doing fairly complicated analysis. You can do some fairly straightforward analysis and then start putting that into a timeline. Most incident response teams, they've got a dedicated timeline of what's happened where and
Yeah.
how, and then build feeding into that. That's certainly a way for SOC analysts to get involved. There's also a large community, well, I say a large community, there's a lot of goodwill and lots of people contributing to the community within incident response. So they're writing their own parsers for artifacts and things like that. So really get into the tools that are being used. So stuff like log to timeline and Zimmerman tools, things like that. Take a look at them, see what it spits out, see what the data that it spits out means as well. So, not just, right, it processes it in this. Right, what does it mean? What does this date mean? What does that time mean? Has it been clicked or has it been typed in,
Yeah.
into the browser, things like that. So really getting the tools for that are used by IR as well.
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. Very, very good points there. So just to flip it a little bit then, when it comes to actually seeing incidents then, what are some of the common sort of mistakes that you see? And do they actually relate to your previous life in the police force, or is it just purely specific to the technical side now?
A lot of the there's a lot of policy and procedure that's implemented in organisations, and the policy and procedure in some ways can enable uh, environments to be secure, more secure. A lot of the time it's forgotten. There's this sometimes a mentality of, right, okay, we're just going to get it done. We'll get it up and working. We'll worry about it later. And actually, if people follow, spend that extra time following policies and procedures, actually they'll find their environments a lot more secure. So an example I use is that we've had a rash of incidents where machines that are attached to domains are internet facing. Now, sometimes there might be a really good reason for that, and there has to be a really good reason, but a lot of the time there isn't. And spending a bit of time, there will be documents that say, yeah, we should have these in a separate, they should be standalone machines, they shouldn't be joined to the domain, and they go ahead and do it just to get the service working. And I kind of understand that, but those policies and procedures are there for a reason. Okay, why is that policy and procedure there? And a lot of the time it is the reason why you don't attach a machine to the internet, because it's attached to the domain, because it's just one hop, and then you're in the infrastructure if it's not a tiered domain. So a lot of the time people not looking at their policy procedure, and that happens in the police. People get tripped up during investigations where they're not following policy and procedure, and things start coming unraveled, and people are personally accountable as well. So that causes an issue. I think having a structured briefing, if you can work out a way you're going to talk to other people and explain the situation, that sort of helps as well. So I went through the national decision making model. That works for me. That might not work for everybody, but I've done it for hundreds of firearms incidents and briefed upwards and downwards and side to side about incidents. So that really works for me. So having a methodology you're thinking helps you stop making mistakes. And what I would say is, if you are coming from a law enforcement background, is that it is a different environment, and you've kind of got to really open your thinking in terms of being quite focused on what the impact of what you're doing is on the business. Whereas with policing, it's kind of very task orientated, and risk. When you're dealing with data emergency policing, 999 policing, it's very right. That's it. We just need to contain that, and we only need to look at the little bit of the bigger picture. You have to look at wider picture, and that's fine. But in incident response, you need to look at bigger picture. You can't just turn machines off without knowing the impact. Whereas we, in policing, we can be very decisive because there's life at risk. So it kind of is a get out of jail free card. And, if we got it wrong, we could say, but, within that in context, you can really do serious damage to a business if you start yanking out plugs when you don't know the impact of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rob, I wish we could have a round two of this, but unfortunately we have come to our time. So yes, obviously if anybody's got any questions for Rob raised today, or you yourself have come from a similar background and are looking to transition into security and would just need some advice from Rob, given the fact that he's done the journey, then please do feel free to reach out. I'll put the details down below at the bottom. But yeah, Rob, once again, thank you very much for jumping on the security space.
No worries. Thanks very much, Nick.